Everyone, in today's video we're going to be looking at sex-linked traits. So I'll talk about a little bit what those are, and then I'll look at a couple of examples from the ones that are in your notes. So first things first, what are sex chromosomes? Okay, so in the human genome, as you may recall, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. 22 of these are what we call autosomes, which means they're just regular chromosomes. They're all identical, they're matching, they link up together, and they contain basically the same set of alleles. The last one is called the sex chromosome, which one you get from the mother, one comes from the father, and they actually aren't completely the same, though they do link up at meiosis. So this one is going to be what determines the sex of the child or the offspring. So in a female, you have to have 2 copies of the X chromosome, whereas in males, you have both the X and the Y. Now, there are certain traits that are located on the X and Y chromosome, and these are called sex-linked traits. Okay, so the X one actually has several genes, and the Y is actually missing a few, but they do have some of their own little unique ones. But for a female, you can actually have a heterozygous female, which in this case we would call, remember, we call those carriers because they can carry a recessive trait. In a male, they only have 1 copy of the X chromosome, and so for that, if there is a recessive trait, they're going to have it regardless. Whereas a female, you have to have regular rules apply here. You have to have 2 copies of the recessive allele. Okay. Now, like I said, certain traits are carried on the X chromosome. And as I kind of mentioned already, since males only have 1 X chromosome, they would be XY. Any gene that is located on the X is going to show up, whether it is dominant or recessive. So remember, with recessive traits, they're often hidden by a dominant allele. In this case, since there's only 1, they can't be masked by it, and so if they are there, they will show up. A common example is red and green color blindness. It is an X-linked trait, meaning it is on the X chromosome. Okay, so in this case, we would use X capital B for normal vision and X lowercase b, as it is a recessive trait, if they are red and green colorblind. Excuse me. So let's take a look at one of the examples that you had in your notes. It says, what are the chances of having a colorblind child if a male with normal vision has a child with a female who is a carrier? Okay, so in this case, we have the female as a carrier. That means they are heterozygous. So their genotype would be X, X, 1 big B, 1 little b. The male, on the other hand, is X, and they are not colorblind, so they have the dominant allele and a Y. Okay, so when we look at the Punnett square, we'll set it up like we normally would. List alleles that you have. Again, it doesn't matter which is on the side and which is at the top. You get the same answer regardless. Actually, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger just because it's a bit more writing in this one. Okay, so altogether, this is what we end up with. So you'll see for the females who could potentially be born into these parents, we have one that, or both of them are going to end up as being heterozygous, or as non-colorblind. One of them will be a carrier, one of them is normal. In terms of the males that could be produced, you get one who is not colorblind and one who is. So, in terms of our possible genotypes, okay, so we'll have all have an equal chance of happening. All of them are going to be 25%. So 25% will be homozygous dominant for females. 25% will be carriers. 25% will be non-colorblind male, and there's also a 25% chance of having a colorblind child who is male. In terms of phenotype, okay, normal, we would say this is normal, but also a carrier. This one, colorblind, or would be normal. And because my face is covering this last one, I'm just going to write it underneath, they would be colorblind, which I'll write with CB. Okay? So in this case, overall, I'm going to make some more room here. You could answer this in two ways. You could either say there's a 25% chance to have a child with color blindness, or you can be a little bit more specific and say 50% chance for males. See? This means the exact same thing. It doesn't really matter which you would write. I would accept both in any case. Either way, like I said, you have a 25% chance for any of the kids, or you have a 50% chance for the males, and generally speaking, there's a 50-50 chance for males and females, so it equates to the exact same thing. Okay? Now, in your notes, there's a little bit there on linked genes, and I'm going to touch on this very, very briefly. Essentially what this means is that certain genes have a tendency of showing up together. Okay? What this likely means then is that these traits that oftentimes come together, they are likely on the same chromosome. Okay? In terms of, if you remember back from Mendel's laws with independent assortment, all of the chromosomes can line up at metaphase. So just do that. And it's completely random how they line up. Okay? If you remember in our little cell thing back from grade 9. And then they will split up and to complete meiosis and mitosis. How they line up is totally random. However, like I said, observation just shows that certain traits like to show up together, and so even though they can split randomly, they're probably on the same chromosome. So maybe, for example, two traits that like to show up together, they're both on this section of that chromosome. Doesn't matter where they line up. If they're both on that same little stretch of DNA, then chances are they're going to show up together. Okay? That being said, if you remember, sometimes something called crossing over can occur, where when they do line up at the middle there in metaphase, they can exchange some genetic information. Okay? So for example, if you look in this side here, okay, we have the homologous pairs lined up. Okay, we got the blue one and the red one from the male, one from the female. Okay, and so when they are lined up like that, for the most part, when they split, they'll just split, and each of the resulting cells, one of them will have the one from the one parent, and the other will get the one from the other parent. When crossing over happens, if you look here, you'll notice that they've exchanged a little bit of DNA. This is crossing over. Okay? So while they were lining up, for some reason, the genetic material just kind of swaps places, and this just leads to a little bit more variation than what you would normally have. Again, in terms of the actual possibilities between any set of parents, because there's so many chromosomes and so many different genes, there's so many different ways that they can combine. And crossing over is just another layer that is added on top of all of this, of when this all happens, that adds to even just a little bit more variation that you can actually have between parents. Okay? So there's a little bit more in your notes, but I'm going to skip ahead now to the practice problems that were at the very bottom. So there was this one here. A child with a blood type of O is born to a mother with type B blood. What is the genotype of the child and of the mother, and what are the possible genotypes of the father? Not that you can't read, but no, whatever. I read it up for you anyways. Okay, so this one isn't a sex-linked one, but I just want to go back and review, just in case you had any confusion about the codominance or incomplete dominance. So remember, blood typing is an example of codominance. Both the A and the B gene want to show up, and they kind of come together if they were mixed up. And so that's where type AB blood comes. However, both A and B are dominant over the O blood type. So that O is a recessive trait, okay? Which is kind of weird because if you, a lot of the population, about 39, 40-ish%, I forget the exact number, is type O positive. Either way, for a child to be type O, that means this would be their genotype, okay? The mother, on the other hand, we know is type B. So remember, there's two possibilities for a mother who is type B. There is IB, or they are heterozygous. Okay? Now, because the child is type O, we can actually eliminate this one here. Okay? So we know for a fact then that the mother must be IBI because the gene has to come from the parents. And in this case, it's obvious then that this I gene must have come from the mother. Okay? The father, on the other hand, there's a bit more possibility there. Okay? We don't really have that information, but process of elimination, we know that, let's say this one was from the mom. That means this one, this second one here, that must have come from the father. Okay? So that means they must have at least one copy of the recessive allele. So in this case, that means the father could have been this, IA, recessive, IB, with the recessive being carried, or it's possible he was type O himself. Okay? So that eliminates AB at the very least. And so, if there was ever a paternity test, they would have to be one of these three things. If a father who was doing a paternity test ended up being AB, we would eliminate that one. It's not possible for the child to be type O in that case. Okay? So let's go back then, or let's continue. So here's a sex-linked one. It says that hemophilia, which is a disorder where you're missing a clotting factor, so when you get a cut, clots don't properly form where the cut is formed, and so you may bleed for an extended period of time. Either way, that is a sex-linked recessive trait, meaning you, as a female, you would have to have 2 copies of the recessive trait, and it is on the X chromosome itself. Okay? So we have a woman who has hemophilia, and they marry a man who does not have hemophilia. What are the possible phenotypes of their children? Okay? So the mother in this case is this. X, let's just use lowercase h for hemophilia. Again, you can use any letter you really want. I mean, if you want to use B for blood or whatever, that's fine too. So the mother has hemophilia, so she has double recessive, and the father does not have hemophilia, so he would be this. Okay? So, what are the possible phenotypes of the children? So let's set up our little square here. So we have X, H, X, H, X capital, and a Y. And what you'll notice is that when you do this cross, because the male only can give one possibility, which in this case is a normal gene, you'll notice that any daughters that this couple might have would not have hemophilia, because you have one of the dominant alleles, therefore it overrides the hemophilia gene. So even though the mother in this case has it, because the father is normal, there's no possible chance that the daughters in this case would have it. However, in the case of a son, if they were to have one, the Y comes from the father, but the that means then the X has to come from the mother. And since the mother can only give the hemophilia gene, any son this couple may have had would have hemophilia. Okay? So in genotypes, you got a 50% chance of having daughters who are carriers and a 50% chance of having sons with hemophilia. So, phenos, okay, this would result in carrier girl, whereas this would result in hemophilia male. So again, in this case, what are the possible phenotypes? Boom, there you go. You have a 50% chance to have a girl who's a carrier. That means their child may one day have it. Or you have a 50% chance of having a son who has hemophilia. Another alternative, not that this question is asking for it, you could say 100% of the males would have hemophilia, or you could say there's a 0% chance for the daughters to have hemophilia. Again, not that the question is asking for that, but there may be cases where it could come up. So just be aware, make sure you're reading what the question is asking for. Last one says, we have, again, it's working with hemophilia, and a woman without hemophilia marries a man with hemophilia. They have a daughter who does have hemophilia. What is the genotype of the mother and father? Okay, so first things first, they got a daughter who has hemophilia. That means this child is this. Okay, this is one where you don't really necessarily have to make the Punnett square. Okay, we can just work this out logically speaking. The male, the man, has got hemophilia. So remember, that means he has the recessive one. The mother, the mother, however, is without hemophilia. So this lady, she doesn't have it, so she has at least one copy of the normal gene. However, this hemophilia was passed on, their allele was passed on by the father. This one just goes directly there. That means then the other one, in this case this one, must have come from the mother. So that must mean that this was received from, she must be a carrier then, which is how the second copy of that allele was passed on. Okay, so that's it for this little lesson on sex-linked traits. We also reviewed codominance. If you have any other questions, please let me know. Contact me via Teams or my email. Either is fine. But the next thing we'll be looking at is pedigree charts. You would have done pedigrees in grade 9, but again, now we've added an extra layer now with codominance and whatnot. I'll also, I can't remember if I posted online, but I will double check that I have another set of questions that have a whole bunch of different ones with codominance, incomplete dominance, and sex-linked ones, just for practice. So I will put those up and then later put up the key. If you have questions for any of those, let me know. Like I said, I will make videos based upon what you guys want. So if you need, I will maybe make another video going over some of those examples in the sheet that I'm going to put up shortly in the next day or so. Okay, so that's all for now. Hope you guys are doing well and have a great day. Stay safe.